People have appeared. Amen. Morning.
I have a neighbor who asked if I knew anyone that sewed and how much your church is how much church. But she said she probably wants it more than a shirt box. She wants it 1 inch in the ladder.
I'd say $1, but that she won't like that. So that would just be $5.
Thank you.
If you want to. Virtually, you want to be a microphone guy for us? No? Right. And some people put their hands up. That'd be great, thanks. Warm, it's kind of fun, and we appreciate that. We know that the seasons are here as a gift from you, and we're heading toward a more rainy season and a winter season. We know it's important for things. We just thank you for how you provide for us. We look forward to the spring and the summer and how that just keeps going. Father, thank you for your word. Thank you for being able to study it today. Pray to be with those that are in other classes, and that give a lot of insight to the teachers, and students can have open ears, and that we can all be encouraging one another today. Thank you, Father, and we pray this through your Son's name. Amen. So let's go to Genesis chapter 23, 1 through 2. Genesis 23, 1 through 2. Sarah lived to be 127 years old. She died at Kirith Arba, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan, and Abraham went to mourn for Sarah and to weep over her. So you read through and you learn about these people, and you feel like you get to know them. And it's interesting that celebrities have often said that many times people will come up to them and they'll start talking to them as if they're personal friends. And the celebrity probably has never seen them before, but some people feel like you know them. Well, we got to know Sarah a little bit here and get to hear her story. It's good to hear as to what transpires for them. So where she dies is about 20 miles south of where Jerusalem is today. She was 90 when Isaac was born. Abraham was 100. Isaac was their only child. So at Sarah's death, Abraham would have been 137 and Isaac 37. Isaac's marriage occurs after Sarah's death. Abraham mourns for her, and the section that follows here goes into great detail about finding a proper burial place. That was something that was very important to the culture at the time. And the person selling the property, the normal approach would be to share a rather large number because there was normal haggling that occurred and bargaining. He gives the high number, and Abraham just pays it. Right? That's what we're going to pay. He's not going to barter. He's just going to do it. It just shows the respect that he had for his wife. And then there's more of a story there, but I thought that was interesting. This is not part of our lesson, by the way. All this stuff we're doing here is bonus. We're in bonus time right now. So let's go to Genesis chapter 24, 1 through 16. And I'm going to be asking us for readers and for a lot of input today, too. Let's start maybe, Rachel, you're close there to Nancy. Nancy, you might be a reader for us. Genesis 24, 1 through 16. Well, is that okay? I have faith in you. You want to split it up? Okay. Yeah, it's, all right, if you want to, you can pull your mask down. It's quite easier to hear you, Nancy.
Abraham was now old and well advanced in years, and the Lord had blessed him in every way. He said to the chief servant in his household, the one in charge of all that he had, "Put your hand under my thigh. I want you to swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of earth, that you will not get a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites, among whom I am living, but will go to my country and my own relatives and get a wife for my son Isaac." The servant asked him, "What if the woman is unwilling to come back with me to this land? Shall I then take your son back to the country you came from?" "Make sure that you do not take my son back there," Abraham said. "The Lord, the God of heaven, who brought me out of my father's household and my native land, and who spoke to me and promised me an oath, saying, 'To your offspring I will give this land,' he will send his angel before you so that you can get a wife for my son from there. If the woman is unwilling to come back with you, then you will be released from this oath of mine. Only do not take my son back there." So the servant put his hand under the thigh of his master Abraham and swore an oath to him concerning this matter. Then the servant took 10 of his master's camels and left, taking with him all kinds of good things from his master. He set out for Aram-naharaim and made his way to the town of Nahor. He had the camels kneel down near the well outside the town. It was toward evening, the time the women go out to draw water. Then he prayed, "O Lord, God of my master Abraham, give me success today and show kindness to my master Abraham. See, I am standing beside this spring, and the daughters of the townspeople are coming out to draw water. May it be that when I say to a girl, 'Please let down your jar that I may have a drink,' and she says, 'Drink, and I'll water your camels too,' let her be the one you have chosen for your servant Isaac. By this I will know that you have shown kindness to my master." Keep going. Before he had finished praying, Rebekah came out with her jar on her shoulder. She was the daughter of Bethuel, son of Milcah, who was the wife of Abraham's brother Nahor. The girl was very beautiful, a virgin. No man had ever lain with her. She went down to the spring, filled her jar, and came up again.
All right, thank you. So Abraham's last major responsibility in light of God's promise is to find a wife for Isaac. There's no explanation as to why they waited as long as they did to find Isaac a wife. Abraham is old and well advanced in age, perhaps near death, we don't know. So he commissions his chief servant, his most trusted servant, to travel to Haran to find a wife for his son. A local girl will not do. Abraham wanted Isaac to marry within the family from the line of Terah, Abraham's father. This unnamed servant does a great job for Abraham and Isaac. Several long discourses are recorded showing the servant's thoughtful care in fulfilling his job. At the time, it was normal for the father to arrange to have things done as far as the marriage. So he showed a lot of trust with his servant, sending Rebecca is presented as a generous, energetic woman whose beauty is complemented by her gracious hospitality and hospitable manner. She acts with self-confidence and treats Abraham's servant, a stranger, with compassion, warmth, and discernment. In this story, Isaac is almost invisible. You don't hear anything about Isaac really that much. Usually, he is referred to as the son of his mother. There's a little bit of a telling explanation there. Well, he's the son of his mother. Although the unnamed servant does refer to Isaac being God's servant, a reference to the passing of the baton that's occurring here from Abraham to Isaac. Rebecca loves to be a keeper. However, Rebecca was very assertive in a time when women were expected to be submissive. This quality was a benefit, I'm sure, but along with Isaac's weakness, led to some later issues, including how she dealt with one of her sons over the other. So this whole idea of marrying and having marriages arranged, boy, you got to have a lot of faith in your parents love you if you're doing that. There was a show on Netflix that Daryl and I watched for a little bit. It was from India, and it talked about arranged marriages and what the whole thing is. They have the parents there. They have a professional person that they hire to figure out who the right person is. Didn't always go so well with what they found there, but that was interesting. And I was able to choose my wife. She chose me too. So a question for you here, and I am looking for input. What reasons and arguments would you share with someone that you loved as to the importance to marry well? Okay, what arguments and reasoning would you as to why it's important to marry well, and how would you define marrying well? Who's our brave volunteers? A volunteer.
Well, having two daughters, we gave them counsel in selecting and, what were some criteria. But the interesting thing is they came with their own list. But on there were things like someone who loves and honors God, and someone who will worship the ground I walk on. No, that's not true. But, the idea that they were spiritually centered, they were productive people, honest people. And, one of the things that, Scripture talks about is not being unequally yoked. And so that can mean a lot of different things. But at the same time, you want your child to be associated or married to someone that is going to lift them up, encourage them, help them to grow as a Christian. These are all important things to us. You can think about all the alternatives of bad things that could happen, and you don't wish those on anyone. But I think being smart about it, and one of the things that I heard from a friend of mine who was Indian, who had an arranged marriage, was that who knows you better than your family? And can really. And how often do we see people that are dating someone and they're kind of blind in love and they just can't put it all together and see that this person isn't right for them? There's just too many emotions or feelings. But having someone who's objective. Now, on the other hand, you can also have people that have conflict of interest, like, how big is the dowry? They have, oh yeah, he's kind of a grumpy person and doesn't follow God, but boy, is he rich. And so you can get some really mixed messages there. And that's more than you wanted to know, but that's just some thoughts on it.
Good. Someone else. What would you describe as marrying well? Anyone else? Uh-oh. Lindsay, what do you think? You got any thoughts that people have been talking to you about future marrying well? Do you have any things you want to share, perhaps? Okay, better around the pressure. All right. Well, I know we've had a few conversations with parents. All right. Well, I would add to that, and then those are very good points. And I have seen where people have married because of money, and I'm sure that's very tempting, especially if you're one that's not coming from money, to not seen that go well for people that have done that, but I can see the attraction. I do think, I would throw in that really there should be a mutual attraction to each other. I mean, how can you marry someone and live with them and all of the aspects of being married unless there is an attraction? And I think that's something that should be part of the qualities that you're looking for, along with all the other ones that we mentioned there too. Someone that has similar values, similar thoughts, similar goals. Oh, we have a hand over here if you want to help out a little bit here.
I didn't want to check you out.
Well, I'll come back to you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think Peter Partland and I were talking about this recently. Who you marry is the second most important decision you'll ever make. And the first one is whether or not you're going to follow Jesus Christ. But if you think about what marriage is, and again, I know that we're speaking into a culture that doesn't value marriage, right? That marriage, the definition of which has been trying to be changed over the years. We understand that God's definition of marriage is one man, one woman for life. And so for us to target that as the ideal, life can be a really long time. And so it's important that you can marry someone who's going to walk the road to heaven with you, who's going to be a godly person, who is going to spur and urge and compliment you and be enduring, through the good times and the bad. It used to be that if you made it 5 years in your marriage, you were set for life. As attitudes change, as culture changes, we've found that not to be true. That just like your walk with Christ needs to be a regular recommitment, probably your walk with your spouse needs to be as well.
The conjectures through, I read Wall Street Journal a lot, and there was a very interesting article that predicted that through, because of COVID, the percentage of divorces would go way up. And the premise was that you were seeing your spouse much more than you'd seen them before leaving or whatever. That would be problems. But actually, the numbers have gone the other way. Relationships have seemingly been strengthened. The divorce rate is down. And I think that's quite interesting. And it kind of depends upon your approach as to how you go into the marriage. If you go into the marriage, well, we'll give it a try. Let's see how it goes. Then maybe you don't spend a ton of time going through and evaluating all the different things. But if you are doing it from a Christian perspective, that marriage is intended for life, that makes it a pretty important decision. I know I actually had a couple different pages, things to check off. Darla got all the checks, but I did. It was something, and I'm sure she did with me too. So, some very serious ramifications here as to how you marry. All right, let's go to Genesis 25, 1 through 11. Genesis 25, 1 through 11. Mark, am I reading for us?
Can you give me the citation again?
Genesis 25, 1 through 11.
Genesis 25, 1 through 11. And the title in my scripture or Bible says, The Death of Abraham. Abraham took another wife whose name was Keturah. She bore him Zimran, Jokshan, Median, Isbak, and Shua. This is why you should read along. Jokshan was the father of Sheba, and Dedan. The descendants of Dedan were Asherites and Letishrites, and the Limnites. The sons of Midian were Ephah, Epher, Hanok, Ebedah, and Eladah. All were descendants of Keturah. Abraham left everything he owned to Isaac. While he was still living, he gave gifts to the sons of his concubines and sent them away from his son Isaac to the land of the east. Altogether, Abraham lived 175 years. Then Abraham breathed his last and died at a good old age, an old man and full of years, and was gathered to his people. His sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah near Mamre, in the field of Ephron, son of Zohar, the Hittite, the field Abraham had bought from the Hittites. There Abraham was buried with his wife Sarah, and after Abraham's death, God blessed his son Isaac, who then lived near Beer-lahai-roi.
Okay, well done. That was not a setup giving you all the hard names here, but it is the best thing to do with the hard names is to just actively own it. Just go it, and of course it's right. And part of the thing that was really annoying about Greg Strong is that I had in my mind all those ways to pronounce things, and then Greg would do it and pronounce it differently. I go, that's probably right. That's pretty much wrong about how it is doing it. But I kind of like my pronunciations on some of these things. So, the time frame as to when Abraham married Keturah is not clear. As we have seen, stories in the Bible are not always written in chronological form. Given the description of Abraham's health prior to Isaac's marriage, it's likely Abraham married Keturah during his marriage to Sarah, especially since they had 6 children. Polygamy was common back then and viewed favorably if you wanted to be, in quotes, a great man. The relationship between Abraham and Sarah is the one that mattered the most to God. Any stories of other women are outside the story of the promise that God gave Abraham. Abraham leaves everything he has to Isaac, but during his life he gave gifts to the sons of his concubines. What are we talking about there? And sent them away to the land of the east. Let's go to 1 Chronicles 1:32. 1 Chronicles 1:32. Maybe even going back to 28. So Chronicles is interesting because it does go through and kind of goes through the lineage on different things and kind of puts things in perspective. And then we're going to talk about the family of Abraham here. The sons of Abraham were Isaac and Ishmael. Now, those two are getting much more prominence because he had other sons, because it goes right into the Keturah down in 32. But they're listed separately. Because these are the sons of Abraham. These other ones, they're the sons of Keturah. Well, the sons of Abraham too, but that's what the Bible does. And then they go through the descendants of Hagar. So we're kind of laying things out here. And so I think it's interesting to see that later on in the writings that the importance of Isaac is still prominent, but Ishmael is something that, definitely something that we talk about too. And it refers to Keturah here in verse 32 as Abraham's concubine. So, the definition of a concubine, you have to go to Solomon, 1,000 that he was married to, 700, was it 700 marriages and 300 concubines, whether they were around, I don't know. That's big numbers, a great man, I don't know what issues of trouble. I think it's interesting that he lived to be 175. It refers to it being a good old age, full of years. That he lived to this age and that he dwelt at peace. And with his son Isaac being blessed shows that God really blessed Abraham. It's also interesting that his 2 sons, Ishmael and Isaac, get over their differences and they bury their father with respect. Where they buried in the same cave with Sarah that had been purchased earlier. And no mention is made of the half-brothers through Keturah, but Isaac and Ishmael are working together. Check time. All right, so, as I mentioned, we're still in bonus time, not related to our story yet here. I do want to talk a little bit about the interaction with Isaac and Rebekah. So we're not going to read it, but it's found in Genesis 25. Isaac, so like Sarah, Rebecca had difficulty becoming pregnant. Isaac prays for her, and the Hebrew word is he prayed fervently. The Lord answered the prayers, and while the children are in the womb, rustling occurs. And I don't know if you remember back to those of you that are married and have had kids, every so often the kid would start doing different things. And I know, I think it was Desiree that did kind of, it's like a somersault. And I was, ugh! And as they get older, you can observe it. So it's something you can actually see. And so that's you imagine the two were going at it. It would have been kind of a tough pregnancy, probably. So Isaac was 60 when the twins were born. And so it was 20 years after his marriage. Similar story as with Sarah. The first one that came out, his body was like a hairy garment. Some kids have a lot of hair, some kids are billiard cues. Nothing going on. That's always kind of interesting. We value, we want a hairy kid. I don't know if that's a body being hairy. And then he read. He was called Esau's also Edom as part of that word. The second one came out with his hand grasping Esau's heel. And that's an interesting position. Jacob means the one who grabs the heel. It also means a finangler, and also can be called one who deceives. These are names that have meaning. Early on, Rebecca loved Jacob, so she favored her child. Parents, if you have a favorite child, never ever say that you do. I don't think that anything good comes from that, but if you do, you really strive not to go. That's true. And we read through that Esau is a very hungry guy at different times. He gives up his birthright for some stew, at least a steak or something. No, he gives it up. It's just a sad story. In fact, there's a reference in Hebrews 12 that talks about the folly of this. It refers to it as Esau's folly, for kind of reference to those that are satisfied the feelings of the moment without valuing issues that are more important over time. So he has a whole thing named after him. So Esau became the father of the Edomites. Who is a prominent Edomite in the Bible? If you have it, raise your hand, you can say it out loud. Prominent Edomite. Built a lot of things. So Herod the Great is an Edomite. And that might give you some additional insight as to why he was not real popular with all the Israelites at the time. So Herod the Great is an Edomite. Also called an Idumean, which means Edomite. All right, now we're getting into the book. We're always halfway through the class, and now we're getting into the book. So it's Genesis 26, 1 through 11. Genesis 26, 1 through 11. Alan, you want to take a turn to read it for us?
Now there was a famine in the land, besides the former famine that was in the days of Abraham. And Isaac went to Gerar, to Abimelech, the king of the Philistines. The Lord appeared to him and said, "Do not go down to Egypt. Dwell in the land which I shall tell you. Sojourn in this land, and I will be with you, and will bless you. For to you and to your descendants I will give all these lands, which I will fulfill the oath, and I will fulfill the oath which I swore to Abraham your father. I will multiply your descendants as the stars of the heaven, and will give to your descendants all these lands, and by your descendants all the nations of the earth shall bless themselves, because Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws." So Isaac dwelt in Gerar, When? The men of the place asked him about his wife. He said, "She's my sister." For he feared to say, "my wife," thinking lest the men of the place should kill me for the sake of Rebekah, because she was fair to look upon. When he had been there a long time, Abimelech, the king of the Philistines, looked out of a window and saw Isaac fondling Rebekah, his wife. So Abimelech called Isaac and said, "Behold, she's your wife. How could you say she's my sister?" Isaac said to him, "Because I thought, lest I die because of her." Abimelech said, "What is this you've done to us? One of our people might have easily lain with your wife, and you would have brought guilt upon us." So Abimelech warned all the people, saying, "Whoever touches this man or his wife shall be put to death." May I make a quick comment? Abimelech can be taught. Can be taught. This is not his first rodeo. This happened with Sarah and Abraham. Could be. Don't know.
If you read through this, the story sounds very familiar. Abraham did exactly what Isaac does here. Abraham was in Gerar and told King Abimelech that his wife Sarah was his sister, a half-truth that omitted their marital relationship. God revealed the truth to Abimelech to protect Sarah. And Isaac, no doubt he knew the story of his father's half-truth and God's continued protection, but still Isaac lied. The author of Genesis draws our attention to this parallel. Isaac committed the same sin as his father, and once again we see sin cannot overthrow God's plan. This illustrates that God will uphold his promises no matter what, though we ought not to sin, as the sin does matter, but we may not stop God's will. Isaac lied was entirely self-centered. He's just trying to protect himself. Yeah. He's willing to put his wife at risk, and he wants to be protected. There's a lot of things about Isaac that are kind of disappointing. This would be, I suppose it's possible, but the conjecture is that actually Abimelech is a name that the Philistines used for their kings, kind of like Pharaoh, or kind of like later on with Caesar. And it's quite, I think probably this is the time frame looking at the amount of time involved, probably a different one, but maybe he had heard about this story, and he learned from that. So, he calls out the lie, and what was Isaac do at that point? Does he deny it? It's very disappointing. In ancient times, definitely sin impacted the whole community, and I would argue sin still impacts the community. Something can happen within a family, and it can have repercussions to many other people within the family, friends, maybe even within a whole church. So sin never affects this one person. Isaac thought that his sin would not hurt anyone. He convinced himself that he was doing good by protecting his life with his lie. The sin is always deceiving. It twists the truth and desires to destroy us. Satan's always looking to devour us. Yet even in sin, Isaac did not destroy God's plan. God used an unlikely man, a Philistine king, to uncover the truth. The Philistines are going to play major roles throughout the rest of the Old Testament. What are some stories that involve Philistines? Do you have one to say out loud? Samson, all right? Samson definitely took down a few Philistines when he died, all right? Other stories that involve Philistines. Goliath, all right? How about another story that involves Philistines? They stole the ark. Didn't go so well for them. I thought it was kind of funny. Steal the ark. What do you think? All right, so let's go to the student book. Student book is page 131, and those of you that are keeping score at home are filling in the blanks there. Actually, the student book, right? Page student book, let's try that again. 110. 110 on the student book. All right, so I'm going to give you the answers here if you would like to write them in. Point 1, God's plan continues despite sin and deception. Isaac, the son of promise, deceived the Philistines to protects the word there, himself above all others. This expressed a diminished, you probably feel that that's what the book has here as answer, diminished faith in God. Our sin never just affects us, but always affects those around us. Yet sin cannot stop God's plan and promises from going forward. All right. So, and this is one we're not going to really look for input here, but as far as sin is considered, are you a person that learns from observing other people's mistakes? Or are you a repeater offender? Do you see it and, yeah, that was a bad decision, and then do the same thing? So I would encourage us all, we can benefit by observing how people turn out, what they do, and how it impacts them. Doesn't mean you have to go through everything on your own. There are some people who seem like that's how they're kind of built. They want to go through it all on their own. It's not the smart way to go. The question that I have, that we don't have time to discuss, but I wanted to maybe think of, what do you say to a person who's making poor choices? Do you just let it happen? Or do you try to say something? It's not always popular. Do people say, hey, thanks for sharing that with me. I'm glad that you pointed out my sin there. I really appreciate this. They should. That's probably not how it's going to play out. But what do you do? That's something to think about. All right, then we go through the whole thing with the blessing, with the Jacob gets Isaac's blessing, and the whole thing that goes on with his mom and all that. So we'll stick with what's in the book here. Let's go to Genesis 29, 31 through 35. Kathy, might you going to read it for us? So it'll be Genesis 29, 31 through 35.
Now the Lord saw that Leah was unloved, and he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. Leah conceived and bore a son and named him Reuben, for she said, because the Lord has seen my affliction, surely now my husband will love me. Then she conceived again and bore a son and said, because the Lord has heard that I am unloved, he has therefore given me this son also. So she named him Simeon. She conceived again and bore a son and said, now this time my husband will become attached to me, because I have borne him 3 sons. Therefore he was named Levi. And she conceived again and bore a son and said, this time I will praise the Lord. Therefore she named him Judah. Then she stopped bearing.
We kind of skipped through some things there. The whole thing with Jacob being called a deceiver. Well, he kind of, if you're a karma person, then he kind of gets this thing with ending up working 14 years for 2 wives, and he only wanted the one. That's a whole different story there. But to say Isaac's family was filled with dysfunction would be an understatement. Isaac had twins. Jacob and Esau were parted with a death threat between them. Jacob, the younger of the 2, deceived his father and stole a blessing. Then he left home and journeyed to his uncle's for protection. And he ends up with Leah. And Leah, how would I like Leah? Yeah, that's a tough one. Yeah, she had weak eyes. That's debated. What does that mean? Oh, you have a comment on that one?
No, I was going to
All
go
right,
back.
Virgil, how you doing?
I was going to go back 1 minute. Is that okay?
Oh, yeah. I'm running time.
Okay. I just wanted to point out, like with Jacob, one of the things that we forget is that we think about the Jacob and Esau situation, and we think about how Isaac was deceived, but at the same time, Isaac was sinning, because the when Jacob and Esau were born, God said that the younger one was supposed to be serving the older one. God said that there would be 2 nations, and the younger one was basically going to be the one who was coming out on top. And it just seemed as though Jacob just completely disregarded that. And I don't know. I think that was a sin, that he was not paying attention to what God said was supposed to happen, that the younger one was supposed to be having that blessing and everything. I don't know. Anyway, that's just what I think that we don't pay attention to. But Isaac did a lot of nasty stuff, actually.
So you want less negatives on the wife of taking all the money, is it?
Oh, definitely, because in that situation, I mean, if I see my husband about ready to completely disregard something that God told him, I might do the same thing. I don't know.
Yeah, there's a long list of disappointing things about Isaac, and that would be one of them, definitely. And that doesn't help, does it? You know, it makes it tough in a marriage when it's that way. So all this dysfunction that's occurring within the family here, you got the twins having issues. He's going away. He has the issues with ending up with 2 wives. Over 14 years. One thing you got to say about Jacob, he's a hard worker. He put in 14 years for that, so you can't deny his work ethic. And these 4 sons are born. Reuben, whose Hebrew name means sea, and this is Leah's take on it. He'll love me now. And then Simeon is born, and his word means to hear. And then Levi enters the world, and Levi means to join. And then Judah is born, and I think it's means God will be praised. So the book makes an interesting point here, is that Leah kind of goes through the process of trying to please her husband, and it kind of evolves into, well, maybe I'm more trying to please God. And that's a very good approach on her part. These turn out to be very prominent people. Levi, the priest would be Levi, Judah through the lineage of Christ. These are significant sons, and Leah definitely did her part to contribute there. And the whole interaction there of maybe the growth that Leah showed of not being dependent only upon her husband, but looking to God, is one that the book makes an interesting point with. So in the student book, point 2, fill in the blanks. God provides sons for Leah. Jacob's neglected wife. She hoped these children would change her husband's heart toward her, but they did not. Leah's focus changed from her husband to the Lord who loved her. Even through dysfunction, the Lord began creating the great nation of Israel and providing the king for her salvation. And interesting discussion here, and one that, so why was there a change from Jacob's name to Israel? And I think one of them is kind of a restarting point, to maybe there's a change from the old Jacob as to who he was, and he had some imperfections as well, to Israel, who is now going to be the father of many nations, or of the Israel nation. And that is kind of a fresh start for him as well. I think that's an interesting way to think about it as to why that occurred. All right, how are we doing on time? So the next story that the book goes into is the one that involves a wrestling match. And the wrestling match is between Jacob and who? Maybe an angel. Yeah, it's kind of this, what is this talking about? Anyone ever wrestled in high school? A wrestler? All right, so you go, what is it 2 minutes around, or is it 3? I forget.
Yeah, there. It's been a while. 3 rounds.
3, 2. I thought it was 2 minutes. And I had a PE coach, a required class to take. He was the wrestling coach, and he wanted me to be a wrestler so bad. And I made the mistake of beating this heavyweight in class. And he was after me from there on. I'm not going to be a wrestler. I'm not going to happen. Different kind of people that are wrestlers, like roll. But no, it was just a different way of thinking about things. And it's so hard, but 2 minutes you tap it out. And 3, this went all night. And wrestling is brutal. And this wrestling coach just turned the heat up to like 110 in the room, and you sweat it out. And I admire wrestlers. They're pretty serious. But this whole wrestling match occurs, and we're not going to have time to really read it right now. 3 pages into about 2 minutes here. Well, it is, I think, that the takeaway from the rest of the story is that the symbolism that God works through Jacob and is impacting the people, and this is kind of a point that is, we're moving into the 12 tribes of Israel. And we are going to read through, well, actually, we're not going to read through, but if you read through the Bible on this one, you will see all the different interactions between the Sarah with Leah and with Rachel, and then the concubines are added in. All these things are repeated. The stories are repeated, even though they were mistakes. There's a competition, and so how many kids, and you have the whole interaction with the brothers and Joseph. And then you end up with the 12 tribes of Israel, and you have the northern kingdom, and then you got the southern kingdom. You got the southern kingdom. Who's in the southern kingdom? The tribes, which ones? And Benjamin. Judah and Benjamin, the other 10, northern kingdom. And they're kind of referred to as the lost tribes because they're taken away at different times in the captivity. And the ones that ended up going back to Israel are the ones that really were focused upon the Judah and the Benjamites that went back in. And those others, Jewish people are spread out throughout the world. It's amazing. I think that I've been told that there's more Jewish people in the city of New York than are in the country of Israel. Had nothing to do with our list there. We'll go on a second time. Thanks for your comments. Run free.
all go up together. But he wanted to say something first.
Sure, okay.
Then Mark and Keith are each going to say something to the congregation.
Okay,
Okay.
and then,
Then I will speak. Then I think we're going to give the gift, and then you will pray. But then they want to say something too. Oh, that's right. Get halfway through what you've done. You've done everything you asked them to, then they change it.
yeah, that's what we're on. So you and Darla are prepared to come up?
Sure.
Okay, should be like right at the end of announcements.
Yep. Then there'll be a slide. Oh, good. And we'll let you know.
Fair enough.
Yeah. No pies. No pies.